Funeral home employees / owners of Reddit, what's the most ridiculous outfit you've ever seen someone buried in? My first husband was an avid fisherman. His parents insisted he be buried in a suit, but his favorite outfit was a pair of khaki shorts and a yellow Bass Pro t-shirt. I asked the funeral director to put that outfit underneath the suit, and no one was the wiser. I put a couple of his favorite lures and a most well-loved pipe in his pocket. I don't doubt for a moment that the crematorium disposed of those items, but at least I knew I did right by him. Edit. Thank you for all the really great responses. I've never had a moment of regret about this decision. It is what he would have wanted. I appreciate the responses from people in the funeral industries too. I didn't think they stripped his body, but I knew they wouldn't leave his wedding ring on, so I think I just assumed they emptied pockets, etc. Kind of a weird thing to assume now that I think about it. Good to know he probably got to keep it all. Story 2. Not ridiculous so much as weird from the outside. My grandfather was buried with a folded up bunch of paper towels stuffed up his sleeve. He was one of those guys who always had something for spills and runny noses, and he always had paper towels or tissues with him. Turns out he had started keeping them in his sleeves when he was younger just in case he ever needed them. And with 5 kids and 11 grandkids, he always needed them. When he died, his sons decided it would be very fitting if he had some paper towels with him, so that's how he was during his viewing and service. Oh, that's sweet. Hope they at least got like Bounty or Kleenex to sponsor them. Story 3. Fancy night dress and matching robe. This 70-plus-year-old lady, or maybe it was her husband's preference, wanted to be buried in this glamorous vintage night dress set that you would see in an old movie. It had feather accents and matching kitten heel slipper things. She also was buried in her costume jewelry. Her regular hairdresser came in to do her hair and cried the entire time. I think she had been sick for a while, so the night dress fit loosely, so we used double-sided tape and a few simple stitches to the night dress to try to keep everything where it should go. It was a weird request, but I thought it was interesting. And to the staff's surprise, her family seemed to expect this as something totally normal. Pretty cool. Having her regular hairdresser do that is brutal. I mean, can you imagine if one of your clients or somebody you had gotten to know really well had you do the whole costume and makeup and all that stuff? That's heartbreakingly, Story 4. I buried my late husband in a Superman t-shirt and his favorite camo pants and boots. He wore his camos when he went to chemotherapy. He called them his battle pants. I put in a poker chip from one of his mates, his BlackBerry, and a toy from our daughter. I always wonder what the archaeologist would make of it if he was ever exhumed. Story 5. Slightly off topic, but my grandpa passed away last week and we had his visitation/funeral on Thursday and Friday. At the funeral home, the director asked when the last time he'd worn a suit was. We said it was probably for my grandma's funeral 6 months earlier. Apparently, there were cookies in the pocket of the pants. Completely appropriate, given my grandpa was a child at heart who loved ice cream, cookies, and candy. We left the cookies in there. Story 6. In my grandpa's case, the outfit was his birthday suit and a treasured blanket. When my grandpa died a few years ago, it was his wish that he be buried naked and wrapped in his favorite blanket, a blanket that my grandma had made for him decades ago. Thankfully, the funeral home was very understanding of his wishes and had him in a casket naked with a blanket around him for his viewing and subsequent burial. So, was it open casket? What a move. Story 7. My grandmother was raised 7th DA and believed in the resurrection. When my grandfather died, I laid out his best clothes and his dress cowboy boots, which he loved. My grandma hated those boots, so she said, "Oh no, they don't bury people with shoes on." So I acquiesced and Grandpa went into the ground in his socks. I am sure she was worried she would have to spend eternity with him in those boots. That's a funny thought that if you get into heaven with whatever you were wearing when you died or were buried in, that's your eternal attire. I mean, it kind of inspires you to dress better, I guess. Story 8. My grandmother had a deck of cards for 60-plus years. They were frayed, stained, and you could barely read them. She refused to use any of the nice fancy new cards we gave her and never shared the story as to why they were so important to her. She was buried with those cards. It seemed like such a tender and intimate moment to place them next to her, as if they were a huge token of her memories that were never meant to be shared. It's been 20 years. I still miss her beyond words. Please remember your loved ones and those memories. If they are still here, hold them tight. Love is infinite, time is not. Love and blessings to you all, always. Story 9. I sang in a funeral where the man wanted to be buried with his bar stool from a local pub. He'd been a regular for years, and the pub acquiesced. It was weird to sing to a bar stool at the graveside portion of the funeral. As I remember, it had red leather inset on the seat. Edit. I feel like I need to go put some flowers on his grave for all this karma. Thanks, y'all. May do that if I get stir crazy from being sequestered. Story 10. Not a funeral home worker, but when my dad died, we sent his favorite Crocs for his feet. They were Ohio State University merch, and he often wore them to church to preach in. Yes, you read that right. My dad was a pastor who preached in Ohio State University Crocs. He also had a hideous shirt that my mom tucked into the casket with him. My mom had tried to get rid of it several times, but my dad had a sixth sense and always rescued it from the donation pile. She didn't bury him in it because it didn't fit him anymore, but she let him take it with him. Edit. So this got way bigger than I thought it would. I'm going to offer some unsolicited advice. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. Let yourself feel all the feelings. It's okay to laugh, cry, rail at God, if that's your thing. Keep all their belongings or give them all away. It's okay to miss them at the big life events and the small. It's okay to have weird thoughts or do strange things at their funeral. My dad did a lot of funerals, and over the years he had some rather stupid ideas of things he wanted that we didn't do. Examples included propping him up beside the pulpit so he could preach his own funeral, having a cheese or veggie tray on his chest so people could have a snack as they went through the receiving line. Seriously, Dad, what the heck? My personal favorite was put him in the casket upside down with a rose between his butt cheeks and a note, "Kiss my rosy cheeks goodbye." It's okay to visit their graves or not. I will tell you that I've never visited my dad's grave because he wouldn't have wanted that. Be well. Oh, in the midst of all the Reddit stories, there was just some really good advice. So true. Story 11. My great aunt wanted to be buried in her bathrobe. Her stepchildren honored it. To be fair though, she wanted her clothes to be donated to a homeless shelter she volunteered at, and her jewelry to go to her kids. She wanted to be buried in her comfy bathrobe since it would cover her and not take too much away from what the others may need. Most of the residents of the homeless shelter attended her funeral, more than half wearing an article of her former clothing. Story 12. I don't know if this counts, but it contains a wedding dress and basically someone's in it. So I'm just gonna say, if it doesn't count, it's okay. If it gets deleted, I have to delete it. When my great-grandmother died, her wish was to be buried with her husband who had been cremated about 14 years earlier. But it's illegal here to bury two people in one grave unless it's asked like years before they die. So my grandmother had this plan. She had a pillow made of great-grandmother's wedding dress. So my grandmother put my great-grandfather's ashes into the pillow, and when we could say our last farewells, we asked the funeral man, I don't know what it's called in English, if we could change the original pillow for this one. He agreed, and we were trying hard not to laugh, because we were smuggling great-grandfather, who was dressed in a wedding dress, into the coffin illegally, and I swear I could hear great-grandmother laugh through the wind. But that's a story for another time. Her funeral was wild. Story 13. My dad was a firefighter. He died of lung cancer when I was 21. We decided to cremate him in his formal uniform, but my mom came out in front of our house full of family and friends with his large collection of superhero boxers and said, "The Flash or the Hulk?" It was a really great moment to lighten the mood and brought his goofier side right back to life. We chose the Flash, by the way. Story 14. One of my medieval LARP teammates lost his wife when they were both in their 50s. They were very passionate players. He buried her in a beautiful white dress decorated with pearls and rhinestone, a veil, a crown similar to King Elrond's. We could see her in the small chapel of the hospital. She was gorgeous. Her husband held a speech as he used to do during LARP sessions when we mourned a dead hero, and at a certain point we shouted her name 10 times. 50 of us. It was heartwarming and surreal. The funeral mass was on the next day. It was fine. Somehow treating her as one of our characters helped him to accept her death. He still plays and wears a medallion with her portrait during game sessions. I'd like to add some details to this story. They had no kids and no close relatives, only some slightly related cousins that they haven't met in the last decade, and his old mom living next door. Players were more than friends. We were their family. She died of a stroke completely unexpected. We knew it hours later, so as soon as news spread, we rushed to the hospital. Many of us didn't even change clothes. They came in jeans and sweaters or in an office suit. For many of us, it was our first funeral we attended with friends. Our families were not involved. Her family members were surprised to see a mixed crowd of younger people in their 20s and 30s besides older players dressed more or less elegant. We were surprised to see her dressed like a queen. She was beautiful, Beside the hospital, there is a small chapel. Hospital staff allow people to see the deceased person in open casket before the mass. That is always on closed casket. We could not wear our full gear. It would have been even more epic, though. So her husband gathered us in the chapel and held a speech. We were enough to fill it up. We spoke off the cuff. It was a beautiful speech, completely unplanned, about friendship, love, and remembrance. The same kind of words he had for our deceased heroes. We had words of hope for himself. And last, he asked us to stand up and shout her name 10 times as loud as we could. Her name echoed in the chapel, and in that moment, reality hit us hard. We all cried. We saw grown-up men with long hair and beards crying like babies. Hospital staff asked us to stop as it was disrespectful, and family members badmouthed us for making a pantomime out of a funeral. We weren't playing. It was our way to express sorrow. Funeral mass was pretty quiet. I am grateful that relatives avoided useless speeches. I want to remember my friend and my high priestess like this. Right now, I can't stop crying. Her husband is writing a fantasy novel about our adventures. It is not in English, but we want to translate it. Now he is 60, and after a couple of rough years, he started feeling better. He still plays and goes out with player friends. LARP saved his life. Hate on LARP all you want, and the game may be fake, but the bond is real. Story 15. A friend of mine worked in the funeral business. She said a woman died and her husband and family were at odds. They felt like he killed her, but they had no proof of it. Anyway, he had them dress her in a tiny sundress and asked for her breast implants because, quote, I paid for them so they're mine. She said it was creepy and she felt so bad for the woman's family. Story 16. My grandmother. She was the kind of woman who wore shoulder pads in almost everything, including t-shirts. My grandfather, a very practical and straightforward man, wanted to dress my grandmother in something she loved to wear all the time, and always got tons of compliments on. I should also mention he is red-green colorblind. Bright colors do not stand out as much to him. It was a sleeveless button-up blouse that was covered in the good old stars and stripes. After some discussion with the rest of the family, we ended up choosing her second favorite outfit, a very tasteful silver dress, with shoulder pads, of course. Side note, the casket was a lilac purple. That Pawpaw would not budge on. Story 17. Warning, this is going to be graphic and kind of gross, but you're all going to read it anyway, so let's do it. My husband's grandma died after a long battle with cancer and alcoholism. She had always been a small woman, but the two diseases wreaked havoc on her body, and she had wasted away to a tiny waif of a person by the time she died. She also had a wickedly dirty sense of humor, which makes this story even better. Now, it should also be noted that his family was grief-stricken but utterly exhausted, as those of you who have ever lost a person to a prolonged illness can understand. The day of the funeral arrived, and we were gathered around her open coffin saying our goodbyes. A somber, nervous funeral director came over to the eldest daughter and whispered something in her ear. She started to giggle and called the other siblings over, who started laughing out loud. Apparently, Granny's skin was thinner than they thought. While dressing her for her last party, the backs of both of her arms ripped open in several places. In order to make her appear normal from the front, the morticians had used duct tape to put her back together again. I can't even tell you what she was wearing, but I'll never forget a bunch of my in-laws laughing over their duct-taped grandma in a casket. It's so morbid, and she would have loved it. I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, if the family's fine, they're fine, but that gives me chills. Story 18. I am not a funeral director. A friend of mine poised away in college due to a drug overdose. She was like super into tabletop gaming, Doctor Who, and anime. Her friends and family decided that the best way to honor her would be a cosplay funeral. So she was dressed in this steampunk Victorian dress that she had before she passed. Only about 1/3 of the people dressed in cosplay. I'll admit I took the lazy route by dressing up as David Tennant Doctor Who, the current Doctor, because the costume was literally a blue suit which I already owned. It was really nice to see all the DMs line up and put her character sheet into her coffin with her. I made sure to give her a complete set of dice too. Story 19. I have had this pair of sunglasses for over 15 years now. I got them at the thrift store, and as you can kinda see in the picture, they have spirals on the eyes. They used to have a Trix logo on the side, so I think they were like a prize you could mail in for at some point. Anyway, I love these glasses. In college, I was known as the guy with the sunglasses, to the point where they interviewed me for the April Fool's edition of the college paper. At this point, they feel like a part of me and I want to be buried wearing them. From far away in some lights, it kind of looks like big bug eyes staring back at you because of the wear, and I can imagine how ridiculous it would look to see me in the coffin wearing them. Story 20. Well, this was more of a little casket decoration thing. So when my great uncle died, we all put a stuffed animal in the casket with him that had red on it, and my family put a peacock in there. We also put a pair of red suspenders in there with him. Edit. I was not expecting this to get so many upvotes. With our red suspenders in the casket with him, because when he was in his early teens, he got a pair of black suspenders and got really mad. So my great-grandparents took him to the mall and got the red pair for him. He was nonverbal. Story 21. I guess this is something I can contribute to. When my oldest son died, I practically begged the funeral director to bury him with big boy underwear on. He was 6 and because of his condition, was never able to wear underwear, only diapers. I don't know why, but I just felt like when he got wherever he was going, he could finally be a big boy. We put him in some comfy pajamas, which is what he wore most of the time since he was immobile. My 4-year-old and I went to Build-A-Bear and made him a Batman bear with a cowboy getup and with the voice button that said, "I love you, Connor. I really love you." He placed that in his little coffin. We also placed a couple letters, one from his mother and I. I also wrote one from his 4-year-old brother, who I guess didn't fully understand other than he knew Connor wasn't coming back. Still breaks my heart. I still wonder to this day when we visit him if that bear's battery still works. It'll be 6 years this October 7th. Well, now I'm crying while I rock my 2-year-old to sleep. It never gets any easier. Last edit, I promise. For anyone wondering, Connor had Manx syndrome. It's a copper deficiency that affects development. Long story short, it's fatal unless you begin copper injections within the first couple weeks after birth. Story 22. My grandma decluttered some of my grandpa's clothes one time. In the box to get donated was this green velvet suit that he had held on to from the 60s or 70s. When he saw that she wanted to donate it, he got all upset, saying that he still liked it and wanted to keep it. She said, "Well, you can keep it, but if you do, I'm going to put that suit on you when I bury you." He ended up letting her donate it. I kinda wish he had kept it though because it sounds like it was an awesome suit. Story 23. My cousin was wearing his Star Wars t-shirt, his basketball shorts, and a pair of footy boots. He passed away of a rare cancer in his early 40s, only a few months after his mom. Seeing my uncle that day was one of the saddest things I ever saw, but after hearing what he was wearing underneath that coffin, all the sadness and tension in the room broke, and everyone erupted in laughter, and that's exactly what he would have wanted. Story 24. My father died in a tragic traffic accident, literally days before retiring. He was cremated after many organ donations, 30 bits and pieces, and the funeral home called Mom and said he needs clothes. Why? He's being cremated. State law. Fine. Mom went to the closet and got an outfit made up of his rattiest fishing clothes, the stuff she would throw out and he would pick back out of the trash, and he was cremated in that. We all figured it was pretty amazing. He went up in his most comfy outfit, all those poor slobs buried in monkey suits, and here his dad just kicking back with a fishing pole enjoying the heck out of his afterlife. Story 25. My dad went with a Mars bar and birthday cards. He died in a palliative care unit and someone in the family bought a Mars bar for a snack but forgot about it. After Dad died, we were given a bag with his stuff in it. We emptied the bag but filled it up again with clothes we wanted him buried in and gave the bag to the undertaker. We went to see him a few days later, which was his birthday, and there he was with the Mars bar in his hands. It had been at the bottom of the bag, and the undertaker thought there was a sentimental reason for the man's bar. We thought it was very funny, and we just let my dad go with his last ever chocolate bar. Story 26. Not a funeral home owner, but used to work in a bridal store. One day a group of women came in and said they wanted to buy a wedding dress to buy their dead grandma in because she had never had a wedding. A little odd, but okay. Off we went, helping them find a pretty vintage dress. A week later, they bring back the dress and say it didn't work out. Due to the buyer's remorse law in the state, we had to take it back and refund them. When we got it out of the plastics, the dress reeked of formaldehyde. Yes, that's right. They put the grandma in that dress for her viewing, then took her out of it and returned it. We were horrified. Oh my gosh. I hope, the discount on that was substantial. Story 27. Not a pro, but my MIL wanted her dad birdies in his WW2 uniform. For most people, that wouldn't be a bad thing, but he always avoided talking about the war. As I understand it, he had proposed to his sweetheart as he wanted off of basic training, and the hero status of it really appealed to her. They found out toward the end of his training that he had developed terrible hemorrhoids and they had to kick him out. He was so ashamed that he traveled to tell his fiancée late at night so nobody would see him. When she broke off the engagement, he headed back out and didn't speak to his family again except his mother until the war was over. They had no idea he hadn't shipped out and thought he was dead. So, trying to get him buried in the uniform he hidden shamefully in a box in his mother's attic so nobody knew his awful secret was a little heartless. Oh, man, this whole thing is sad. Unless he liked the fact that he did all the basic training and maybe he felt pride in it, but it sounds like he was very ashamed of it. And also that lady, I mean, you freaking break the poor guy's heart because he's got hemorrhoids and he couldn't be in the army? Come on. Story 28. I used to work in a morgue when I was an undergrad to help pay for tuition. One of my tasks was to dress the dead and place them in the casket. When I arrived to work, I located Miss Jane Doe, a 95-year-old lady, from our cooler and placed her on a silver table. I then proceeded to find her outfit that the family had left us for Jane Doe to wear. As I take the clothes out of the bag, I quickly realized it's not the usual apparel for a woman in her 90s. It was a glittery black dress that came down mid-thigh, exposing cleavage with spaghetti straps and a pair of red high heels. They also provided a thin scarf to go around her shoulders. I thought to myself, she is definitely dancing up in heaven now. Unfortunately, due to skin tear, we had to advise the family to use a less revealing attire. Story 29. Funeral director here. I have two personal favorites. One, a man who was dressed in a wizard's cloak. When I met with his wife and his mom, they kept describing him as a mystic and magical, and I didn't quite understand why until the family gave me his clothes and explained that he was a wizard. Everyone that came to visiting was also wearing cloaks. 2. A woman who was dressed in a sequined ball gown, floor-length mink coat, and a mink headband. She also has sequined high heels on. Can't forget to mention she was 86 and had multiple self-portraits around the room of herself. We also had a horse-drawn hearse bring her to the church and the cemetery. Story 30. I've had some different outfits, but in the funeral profession, I could never class anything as ridiculous, as everyone is individual and it's so special to me how different people define themselves. However, here are some of the outfits that stuck with me as I found them so personal and touching. I've had one where the woman went in a full Christmas outfit in the middle of June. One where the man was wearing the dirtiest, smelliest, dog-haired suit, but were implicitly told to leave it as it was him, which was just so lovely. An 83-year-old trans woman who never came out publicly, but her best friend who was arranging the funeral brought her in her best dress, killer heels, and a wig, even though no one at the funeral would have a clue. I also gave her glam makeup and false eyelashes. If there is a heaven, she strutted in there like an absolute queen, a Jedi. These little things are why I love my job so much. Story 31. Not a funeral homeowner or employee or even dead yet, but I was telling my wife recently I want to leave a letter to be opened at my cremation, politely informing people I've been eating corn kernels for years and I'm going out with a pop. Edit. It's a toss-up between this and an open casket and having "Pop Goes the Weasel" playing in the background. Story 32. A grown man wearing an apron, and just an apron. Didn't look like anything religious either. 2. We always cut the clothes to put them on the bodies. This one guy wanted to wear his Texas A&M belt, so we cut it. Like any belt, they ended up giving us heck because they wanted their entire family to be buried in that belt. 3. There was this very large older lady and she was going to be buried in a tube top and booty shorts. 4. A kid who died a tragic death. The parents wanted something a bit more revealing, like a lowish cut tank top dress, little but above the knee, etc., while she had major open wounds and bruising all down their body. We asked them to change the outfit but didn't want to, thinking we have some magic healing touch, but I bet the family regretted that decision during open casket. Story 33. Has not happened yet, and knock on wood it doesn't happen anytime soon, but my mother has a very specific outfit she wants. My mother, who is a creature of comfort, has decided that she wants to be buried in the clothes that she wears most of the day. Those happen to be a set of flannel pajamas that must have pockets and comfy slippers. To take this one step further, one day I walked into the living room where my mother was lying on the couch with her hands crossed on her chest. She looked up at me and said, "This is how you will see me when you bury me." 18-year-old me was not prepared for this. I'm just curious how her life's going. You know, that's a lot of death talk to be really seeking the idea of rest, you know? If he was 18, she was probably in her late 30s or 40s. Pretty early to be picking out clothing, poses, and caskets. Story 34. When my mom died, my trashy sister showed up dressed like Beetlejuice. Black and white striped suit made of flannel with a white turtleneck under it. She is very large-chested and couldn't button the jacket. I swear that suit was really pajamas. Every time she got near me, I whispered Beetlejuice under my breath 3 times. Butthole move? Sure, I'll own that. But she's so insufferable. I refuse to feel bad. She literally had the director place a throne-like chair in the middle of the first row so she could sit on it while the rest of us peasants got folding chairs. Wow. Like, of all the places to not make the event be about you. Story 35. I have a few. First, an early 20s couple was killed in a car accident not long after their wedding. They were in their wedding dress and suit. So sad. One woman passed away and her husband had us put an American flag bikini on his wife in place of underwear. She was at least 60 plus. No one could tell, but he knew. Had a woman whose daughter passed away suddenly at a young age and always said she wanted to get married in mom's wedding dress, but she buried her in it instead. Also, a lot of people request to be cremated naked. I want to go out how I came in, they always say. Funniest one, a Chucky onesie. The kind where you zip it all the way up and the hood is in his face. Story 36. Not dead yet, nor am a funeral home operator. However, I am a priest, so I do funerals pretty regularly. But in this case, it's what I will be buried in. I am going to be buried in the ugliest vestments that the church I serve owns. As you can imagine, loving, kind people will sometimes donate vestments for the church. The problem is, sometimes they are the most ghastly things you've ever seen. Scary Jesus faces, huge somehow orange flowers, you name it. Being a church and a kind donation, you can't exactly throw them away, especially if relatives are still around. But we learned in seminary it's fairly traditional to be buried in vestments as a priest, and it's considered a high honor for the vestments. It's a last act of charity so that future clergy at the church don't have to wear the vestments and you spare the feelings of the donators. Win-win. You can't exactly throw them away. Challenge accepted. Story 37. There was this one guy in town, a really funny old guy. He reminded us all of Rodney Dangerfield. Lots of crude humor, quick-witted, etc. When he passed, he had a few funny things that we had to put in order for him. Firstly, he had us print this note and put it on the table near the guest sign-in book. It said basically that there was $1,000 worth of hundreds stashed on him / in his coffin, and whoever finds them can keep them. Once the services began, it became quite apparent that there were way too many people willing to put their hands all over a dead guy looking for cash. The best part was, they were all between his legs, and he had written, "Wink wink" or "Thanks" on each of them. Dude was a legend. Story 38. We buried my grandma in her favorite pajamas, her fuzzy pink dressing gown, she specifically told us not to buy a new one, and her comfy walking boot socks. For a tall lady, nearly 6 foot, she looked so tiny and frail at rest. She looked as though she had an extra glass of sherry and was having her evening nap. They let me leave a letter in her hands to be buried with her. I couldn't tell you what it said. I think a lot of words just came out onto the page and I didn't dare reread it. Story 39. My grandfather was buried in a clean, which was the most surprising part, flannel shirt and suspenders with his black work pants. It was so strange seeing him dressed like himself. I laughed when I walked up to the coffin to say goodbye because I didn't know you could bury people in whatever you wanted like that. My grandmother thought it was hilarious that I was surprised his shirt was clean and not covered in wood shavings. It made the funeral a lot more lighthearted, and it was so nice to happy cry. Story 40. It's not that ridiculous, but when my uncle / godfather passed, we put his lighter and container in his pocket, which was filled with the rest of the joints he hadn't smoked before he died. And he wasn't in any fancy clothes, just the normal outfits you'd see him in. Graphic t-shirt, unzipped hoodie, jeans and boots, overall with his spiked to the point hair. He was buried as how he truly was, with his weed and not in some outfit that he wasn't known to wear. Story 41. I recently lost my mom. She was an eccentric, mystical Buddhist hippie, and she fully believed that when she died, it was just like casting off an old set of clothes and putting on a new one. When I asked her how she wanted her cremation to go, she told me not to make a fuss over her empty shell because it was only ever a temporary vessel for her soul. She told me, "Pocket any jewelry I'm wearing, then throw me naked into the flames." My goodness, she was so metal at times. Anyway, I compromised a bit. She went into the flames wearing a nightie, and I'm wearing her rings as I write this. I still look closely at every baby I pass, wondering if I'll recognize her in her new body or if she'll recognize me. Story 42. My dad passed recently. He was cremated. However, we had done a casket or burial, it would have been a Santa suit. My dad was Santa's helper for about 40 years. His funeral had about 20 other helpers show up. We had his suit sitting on a chair. I now have it in my closet. He would have liked to have been in that. It was his favorite thing in life. I was actually really happy when no young kids showed up because it would have been really hard to explain Santa dying. Mentioned a few times through the service. Story 43. Not really ridiculous, but maybe out of the norm. My grandpa passed away about 2.5 years ago, and he was buried in gray sweatpants and a t-shirt from one of my high school sports teams. We went to the same high school, 49 years apart. He attended all my games and every sporting event after I graduated. He was content in sweats and a t-shirt. He was a big believer in heaven and wanted to be comfortable there. Not sure what I believe in, but I do hope he is happy. I miss him, and it has been hard without him. Story 44. I'm not a funeral home employee, but my grandmother passed away from lung cancer when I was 16. She was like a second mother to me and one of my best friends. Anyways, she loved the Dallas Cowboys, a total fanatic, and also hated shoes, like barefoot any chance she could get. When I was a kid, she'd joke that it was my duty to be sure they didn't put shoes on her before they put her in the ground. So she was buried in a Cowboys jersey, Levi jeans, and barefoot. I remember when I saw her in the casket for the first time. My mother had them open the bottom half to give me some peace. One of those things that really matter to me. Ah, that's sweet. Story 45. Not an outfit, but we buried my Nana with a pack of Arnott's Malto milk biscuits. Whenever someone had a drama or was upset by someone, Nana would sit them down, shove a biscuit in their hand, and talk it out. In her mind, a biscuit could fix anything. This wasn't even limited to humans. She lived next to my cousins, and whenever their dog would get worked up, she'd slide him a biscuit too. I have so many memories of chomping down one of those biscuits while she wiped betadine on scraped knees. Or when something sad happened in a book I was reading and Nana wanted to debrief. I have anxiety issues and my parents used to harp on me about being dramatic, but never her. Have a biscuit and calm down was her catchphrase, I swear. When they lowered her into the ground, instead of us each dropping flowers or dirt, we all dropped the same biscuits over the top of her coffin. One last biscuit to calm us down. Well, if that isn't one of the sweetest things I've ever heard. I wish my grandma gave me biscuits. Story 46. This question is gold. I'm getting cremated because it's cheaper and my wife and kids can spread the ashes on all the countless beaches and mountains we've been to. But now, I'm adding this to my will. Shirt says, duck. Hide some bullets in pockets for whatever shorts or pants I have on. When they come by to pick my body up, tell them, my husband was a legend. He definitely went out with a bang. Ironic shirt, hilarious prank, worthy puns, and ensures wife doesn't do something irrational with that one guy who always acts like he was your best friend just to slide it in at the service and say, we'll get through it together. POS won't even get a chance with my 10 because she'll be in prison for attempted murder on the crematorium staff. What? Sounds like this guy's got a lot going on. Sir, before you die and you want to get your attire arranged, I would, consider getting better friends or a spouse. Story 47. We, my brother, sister, and I, upset a lot of people when we refused to bury our dad in dress pants, dress shirt, and dress shoes. We buried him in one of his favorite Hawaiian print shirts. He picked up about 10 at the Dollar General, Wrangler jeans, Masonic hat, Masonic apron, and boots. We refused to bury him in clothes he didn't like or feel comfortable in. Daddy always called his dress shoes his getting married and getting buried shoes, because those were the only times he wore them. Story 48. When it was my grandmother's turn to be buried, she was draped in a blanket I crocheted for her when I was very young. She'd been in the hospital for a long time and I'd been wanting to try crocheting for a while, but that was my first project. So she got a lot worse, and I had less than a day to make that blanket because I was worried she wouldn't get to use it. My grandmother was always cold, and she held onto that blanket even though it was full of holes and definitely kinda ugly. Story 49. My grandpa was buried in his pair of Kelly green Chuck Taylors. He was a silent force within the family. When he spoke, you listened, and was also rather conservative and not one for flash. Which was why, when he came home in bright green shoes, his daughters, One being my mom and wife were so confused. "Why did you get such bright shoes?" they inquired. "What do you mean?" "These are as dull as they get." You see, he was also colorblind and thought he was walking out of the store with brown shoes. He got such a tickle out of the situation that he wore those shoes until they were riddled with holes and kept them even after they couldn't be worn anymore as a memory. It seemed only fitting that we sent him on his next adventure in something that we knew brought him such joy and gave us all left behind a laugh too. Story 50. I've gotten wedding dresses on a few occasions and I always roll my eyes. They never fit and are always showing too much skin. One guy brought one of his own and proposed on one knee in the casket. I am still waiting for someone to request Kiss or ICP makeup. One time during a funeral for a 22-year-old girl, someone's cell phone rang and the ringtone was "Livin' Dead Girl" by Rob Zombie, and it legit played the entire chorus before the owner realized. Story 51. I plan to be buried butt naked. No coffin or anything. Just dig a hole, throw my fat naked butt in it, and cover me with dirt. Anyone want to see my hairy man boobs or my little dingus, they are welcome to look. All I ask is that you plant a marijuana plant on me and that every year on my birthday, my closest friends meet up and smoketh of my herb. Well, that's a sweet thought. In theory, I don't know what the rules are for marrying fat man-boobed men under weed plants. But, if legal and possible, I think that could be a fun gesture. Story 52. I, a funeral director, just always ask what the family wants the person to wear/be placed with. It's been everything from a simple shroud, a full-on Gucci suit, or nude but covered with flowers. I also always ask if there's anything they want to go with the person, letters, photos, etc. I don't know, at this point I really don't see anything as ridiculous per se. It always means something important to the person or their family. And now I realize I've become a buzzkill. Apologies, please go on about your days. Story 53. My grandfather had Parkinson's and was not very mobile, so he couldn't tie his shoes in his old age. To make it easier on my grandma and him, they bought him Rockports with Velcro. One of the straps always seemed to come undone, but he loved those shoes. He was buried in those shoes, and my grandma requested they leave one strap undone since it was always like that when he was alive. They were kind enough to do that, and to this day, my family and I smile about it. Story 54. My grandfather was from Greece. At the funeral service, I was bawling my eyes out when I noticed my brother and my father digging in their pockets and then putting something in the breast pocket of Grandpa's suit. When they came back to sit down with the family, I said, "What the heck were you doing up there?" They told me they didn't have a drachma, so they had to settle for a dollar bill for Grandpa to pay Sharon so he could get across the river of Styx. Story 55. My dad always had at least 2 pens and some form of paper in his breast pocket together with some reading glasses. He also carried a small black comb in his pocket and would often fix his hair real quick in mirrors. When he passed 2 years ago, we put him in his favorite shirt and a sweater with his pocket filled. He also wrote everything down on Post-its, and we'd have a stack of them on top of the casket for people to write a last message on. Many did, and we put it under his pillow. Story 56. Not too odd, though. I guess that's the point of my comment. Haha, but a lot of people get buried with beer. I work at a funeral home. For a bit of a lot of people requested they go in the ground with a beer or two. If the family approved, we would tuck the beer in a noticeable spot in the coffin. If the family didn't approve, and not all did, the beer would be hidden under the sheets, out of sight, out of mind. So if you want to be buried with your favorite drink, go for it. I'm sure your funeral home will make it happen and not think twice. Story 57. My dad passed away in 2015, a month after I graduated high school. During his chemotherapy, we watched Sons of Anarchy together every day after school or when I got off work. I was the only one working in the house at that time, as he was sick and my wicked stepmother didn't have a job. We buried him in his favorite Sons of Anarchy shirts and jeans, with pictures of us stuck inside the casket. Not a ridiculous outfit, but just wanted to share. Story 58. A local owner has a sign up in his office that says, "We don't judge what the dead guy wears. We once buried a guy in clown makeup." I asked an employee about it during a delivery. I work for a delivery company, and he told me a guy got hit by a car on Halloween dressed as a clown and nobody touched it because, dead guy. The business was very by the book and the family did not pay enough to get the makeup removed. after an employee refused to work, stating, "He looked like Pennywise." The owner took a sponge to the makeup, but because their sponges had fallen apart because of the huge amounts of use and aggressive scrubbing, ironically that day I was bringing them new sponges, the makeup only smudged. He did get put in a decent outfit, suit, tie, pants, the drill was buried. So I guess not an outfit, but I thought it belonged. Story 59. My grandfather was known for always having a Pepsi in a styrofoam cup. When we buried him, one of our closest family friends put a styrofoam cup full of rice and a bottle of Pepsi Max in his coffin. We also put his dog's collar in his suit pocket. He never went anywhere without her, so we wanted him to take a piece of her with him. I sobbed when I put it in his pocket, but I'm glad he has her with him. Story 60. I'm late as F to the party, so this will get buried, but I don't care. Not so much ridiculous, but most memorable. This poor teenage boy had committed self-unaliving. I was in charge of the viewing his family did before cremation. He was wearing what looked like a tan-colored robe and a brown robe over that. When I opened his casket, his dad looked at him, broke down crying, then looked at me and said, "He's a Jedi." I, being the nerd I am, smiled and said, "The Force is strong with this one." I cried as soon as they left. Story 61. My dad passed away at home in his regular t-shirt and a pair of jogging pants. He had cancer and was in bed during the final stages. The men from the crematorium came to get him and took him away, and my sister just had to go the next day before he was cremated and give them one of his old baseball hats to put on his head. In life, he always wore a baseball cap, and she couldn't bear the idea of him being cremated without one. The anniversary of his death is in 1 month, and writing this has just made me so sad all over again. Story 62. I posted this in a similar thread about a week ago. A good friend of mine owns a funeral home. He was prepping a body and noticed a rather large bulge in the pants going down the leg. The guy had a 14-inch dildo stuffed in his pants. They asked his wife of almost 50 years, and she said, "Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Tim always stuffed that in there. He's been doing that since I met him." She asked that they put it back in when they dressed him for burial. The guy's packing 14 inches of fake meat for eternity. And he had to be buried 7.5 feet under. Story 63. My dad wore glasses from the time he was little, and my siblings and I could only picture him wearing his glasses. My mom said he hated them because as he got older, the glasses got heavier and pressed into his nose uncomfortably. We all agreed that was reason enough to not make him wear them to the grave. But my mom panicked last minute and said she was afraid he wouldn't be able to see and knew he'd never go anywhere without them. The kind funeral home attendant folded them into my dad's hands and said he could carry them with him in case he needed them. I'm loving all the sentimental thought and ideas that are going into, oh, but what if he doesn't have this and he's going to need this? And, the idea of regardless of what your religion or your belief in the afterlife is, it's just kind of it doesn't matter. I want them to have this and be peaceful and have, this love and care and these kind of identifiable objects that they may need. That's very sweet. Story 64. Not an employee. When my dad was cremated, I was the last person to see him in a cardboard box with a big but Y incision on his chest. He was law enforcement officer for 35 years and a soldier in the Vietnam War. They would not cremate him with his service revolver. I stopped on the way and picked up his favorite scotch and a pack of his favorite cigarettes. We shared a drink, and I had the first puff of cigarettes I had in 10 years. I tucked a lit cigarette between his lips, and we had one last drink. I tucked the bottle under his left arm and the smokes with a pack of matches under his right. I draw the symbol of the All-Father on his forehead, and as I kissed it, I put a shiv behind his neck. Unto Valhalla, old man. Story 65. My father was a stagehand his whole life. Every day, whether work or home, he wore Wrangler jeans, black New Balance sneakers, and some colored polo. My mom always liked that he looked great in a yellow one, but he would always somehow stain them, whether it was from pasta or him sneaking chocolate syrup from the bottle. We had him buried in a yellow polo, his jeans, and his work shoes. At his funeral, the entire family drank a hard cider, his favorite drink, and left one with him in the casket. Story 66. My aunt was hit by a train and killed. I was helping my cousins organize the funeral as they were quite distraught. My cousin brought up clothing for her. Funeral director froze. I quickly said, well, she never wore clothes. She would probably prefer to be out as she came in. When cousin wasn't looking, funeral director mouthed, "Thank you. there was no way she was wearing clothing after being hit by a train. Story 67. I'm not a funeral home worker, but I do have an interesting one. When my dad died, he was dressed in his favorite clothes for his funeral. They consisted of Maryland Terrapin sweatshirt, faded blue jeans, mittens, and white New Balance sneakers. Dad was paralyzed from the chest down, but he certainly liked to be comfortable. Even when he could walk, he loved having multiple sets of shoes. Story 68. Reading these comments about people who picked nice and sentimental things for their loved ones is sweet, but makes me so upset about the funeral home I was stuck with when my mom passed. They said I had 1 hour to bring clothes for her to be in, even though her funeral was the next day. When I said I needed a few hours since they were on the other side of town and I wasn't at home when they called, I was told not to bother bringing anything. 1 hour was all the time they would give, and they would drape her in nice linen. It was tacky and it looked like a bad white tablecloth. I should have told them to put her back in the pajamas she died in. Anything would have been more dignified than what they did. You know, Mr. Reddit OP guy, I'm sure your mom knows that you tried and you wanted to. So don't feel too bad. But also screw that freaking funeral home. I mean, it's weird for people to be so stuck up, and especially by hearing all these other stories. People get buried in friggin' liquor and shorts and dresses and clown makeup and whatever, and they're like, no, you have got about an hour, okay, tick-tock. Like, it's a funeral. It's their loved ones. Let them, ease up. Give them a couple more minutes. Story 69. PSA. In Canada, the only things the FH would remove prior to cremation are batteries and items with batteries that can't be removed, as they can explode in the crematorium, damaging the brick. Jewelry, as it will generally melt and either get stuck to the floor or get processed with the rest of the remains, and bottles of booze, as they are flammable. And of course, anything that the family wants back, which is prearranged and signed off. Everything else goes with the deceased. Story 70. Well, I'm not buried yet, but I'm quite unwell and the future is not looking great. Or to be blunt, that long. I have a dilemma. I always said that I'd be buried in my old painted leather jacket from my old punk days. It's a cut-down 70s racing leather, still has most of the paint on it. It was my armor against life, kept me safe and warm when homeless, stopped a Stanley blade when I was attacked. You get the idea. Hasn't fitted me properly in a long time, but I always figured if there is anything on the other side, a bit of armor may come in handy where I'm going. But my daughters love that jacket. To them it is a big part of me, and they've even worked a way to share it equally. What the F do I do? I'm really torn. I love my daughters more than anything, but that dang jacket is literally the only possession I have never parted with. I lost literally everything a few times in my life, but the armor always came through it with me. I know it's stupid. I'll be dead and it doesn't matter what I'm wearing, but still it is the one thing I always promised myself. Really don't know how to fix this. Edit. You guys are right. I will leave it to them complete and as is. I guess I was still trying to process the whole dang thing, and to be honest, in hindsight, what the heck was I thinking anyway? I've decided to make sure I leave a couple of packets of their favorite sweets when they were little in the pockets, and probably a little note for them each as well. Thank you to all that replied. Big love to you all. In case you were wondering, assuming I figured out how to do it right, here is the jacket, my ratty old armor. Oh, that's really hard. And that's sweet of him to do that for his daughters. And I know he's like, well, what am I thinking? I can't bring it with me anyway. But I'm sure the idea of death is pretty traumatic, and feeling like you're approaching it has got to be scary. So anything that kind of brings you peace in some way, you have a right to. So anyone who's like, this is what you should be doing, that's not exactly clear cut, but it's sweet of him to part with that in favor of his daughters. It's a good guy, and hopefully he's still with us. I don't have any timetable, but praying for you, man. Story 71. My wife's grandpa was hilarious. When people passed away, his daughters and son would always say we are sending flowers, and we will say it's from all of us. His response was always, what are we sending them flowers for? We should be sending them pies or something like that. At his funeral, there were pies around his casket. It was amazing. Story 72. My grandmother worked in a mortuary. She kept underwear and socks on hand. So many folks remember the suit or dress but forget the underclothes. And no one wants to be buried without their skivvies. She talked about how nice it was to have a picture of the person and their makeup so that she could get the makeup just right. She really treated those that passed with dignity. She also brought home the hospital gowns that they were delivered in and wore them as aprons. So there's that too. Story 73. When my grandpa died, we buried him in his hospital gown. He died in the city where we were living, not where he was to be buried, and it was far easier that way. But my uncle, his son, insisted on burying him with the flag of his favorite football/soccer team. By the time I met him, he was already too old for the travel, but in his youth, he didn't miss a single match, and it really was something. He was incredibly passionate about that and tango. Talk about stereotypical Argentinians. Sadly, we couldn't find the flag even after turning the house upside down, so he couldn't be buried with it. I'm sure he would have liked it though. While searching for it, my sister stole his very old metal shoehorn. It decorates our library now. Obviously not something he was buried in, but still a bit ridiculous when seen objectively. Story 74. Not a funeral home employee, but my grandfather always said he didn't want his money wasted on a funeral or a fancy casket. Before he passed, he arranged for a plumber nephew of his to prepare a foot-long piece of sewer pipe that was capped on both ends. He was cremated and his ashes were put into the pipe, which pleased him because it would be water and airtight. That set off a weird tradition for my family, as one of his sons and his brother-in-law were also laid to rest in sewer pipe. Story 75. Backstory. My father-in-law's sister had passed away in 2016. Her family didn't have a lot of money for a funeral and couldn't afford to have her buried in the Catholic family cemetery, so her family was forced to cremate her. My sweet, amazing father-in-law passed away last year. His niece pulled me aside the night before the viewing and told me she brought her mom's ashes with her and wanted to know if it was okay to slip the ashes in the casket with him. Knowing my FIL, I knew he would have found this absolutely hysterical and would have made jokes about sneaking his sister into heaven by smuggling her in. So the day of the viewing, I was appointed as the one to sneak our aunt's ashes into my FIL's casket. It made me feel weirdly better that he wasn't alone. That's an adorable story, but I'm just wondering, as the father-in-law, where's his actual son or daughter? Like, I assume they must also be dead, but it wasn't brought up or mentioned. Great story and all, it's sweet and sentimental. I'm just curious, I wouldn't be comfortable enough to do that for my wife's father, I don't think. Or at least I definitely wouldn't be the one giving the go-ahead. Not saying there's anything wrong with it, I'm just saying in terms of, sneakiness and tucking things into the casket, I would like to leave that to the wife or the husband, or, you get it. Story 76. My grandmother died 3 months ago due to cancer. I haven't really had the time to deal with her passing due to school, and now the interruptions impacting everyone. My grandmother and grandfather had immigrated to the US from China, via Hong Kong and London, in the late 1920s and had raised their family here. My grandfather passed away before I was born. I attended my grandmother's vigil ceremony, and while I recognized many people, over 60% of the people there were unfamiliar to me. It turns out my grandmother, even up until I started attending college not 30 miles away, had been teaching Chinese at a local after-school program since she was 30. She taught in Pittsburgh, moved to Columbia, Maryland, and even taught a few programs in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. As she and my grandfather gained some wealth and friends, they founded a private investment club to fund the program she taught in, leading her social circle to pool a considerable amount of money, which has grown to this day. Those 60% of people at the ceremony that I didn't recognize were people she had impacted, some directly and some indirectly. I know she did a lot of good. I hope I can live up to that. Story 77. My grandma, Nan, was buried in a pink shawl wraparound. It was beautiful, or it would have been if she hadn't passed on a bank holiday and been kept refrigerated for 11 days and then sent to a funeral director who didn't know her. After she saw what they did to my granddad, she wanted to change, but couldn't for some legal/money reason. I couldn't look for more than a few seconds before I had to leave, but she was wrapped how she wanted to be. She was being cremated and always said it would be a waste to burn nice clothes. I'm very lucky that she always told me, "I won't be there. I'll be long gone by then and watching over you. It will just be my shell, so don't worry." I feel like she knew how bad they would make her look. In memory of her, I call my son my little sausage, which is what she always called me. I, in return, always called her Little Nan. He was born 9 days after the year anniversary of her passing. I love my little sausage, and I know she would have too. She also passed less than a week after my wedding, a heart attack the day after the wedding at 95 years old. My parents told me not to visit since she would be fine. I regret not going to see her now, but what's done is done. Sorry for the ramble. It felt good to talk about her again. I miss you, Little Nan. Okay, so I love the story, but I just have to say, if you're gonna nickname your son Little Sausage, very sweet, adorable, right? Make sure you stop doing that after he's 13, especially in front of, girls he might like or his friends. So just gonna put that out there. Story 78. Not a funeral home employee, but my late husband was a police officer. Long before he died, he made an offhand comment that he wanted to be taken to the cemetery in the paddy wagon if he died while he was still working. His department made sure it happened. They had to retrofit it to accommodate his casket, but his friends all rallied to get it done. Some people thought it was weird, but it was what he wanted. He was a smoker, and I made sure he had a pack of Marlboro Reds and a lighter in the breast pocket of his dress blues that he was buried in. I also have it on good authority that he had the panties that I wore at our wedding in his pants pockets, and a couple of joints in the pack of cigarettes. His death was tragic and sudden, and we were all reeling, but we came together to do right by him. Story 79. Own a funeral home with my dad. I haven't ever really seen anything crazy, but what's crazy to me is how many people we bury in clothes that aren't yours. For example, we've had a person who weighed 140 pounds, but the family gave us XXL shirts and pants that could have fit 3 of them. And we've always had the opposite. 280-pound person that passed and the family gives us a medium-sized shirt with jeans that'll fit 1 leg. Like, I know these people had clothes of their own, but why not give them some dignity on the way out and give them something that fits? Story 80. After a few years in the business, licensed 3, but grew up in it, I can't say anything seems weird anymore. I've had to cut brand new Brooks Brothers suits to make them fit, leather biker chaps, stained team sweatshirts, low-cut blouses and dresses, pajamas, thong underwear, hunting gear, etc. I always tell families whatever they would want or be comfortable in and what the family would want. As long as it's legal, we'll get it done. In the end, a funeral is for the living left behind. We keep the descendants' wishes in mind, but if Grandpa wanted a latex bunny outfit, most kids and grandkids don't want that to be their last memory. I think the weirder things are what people put in the casket to be buried with people. Everything from pictures and cards to booze and blunts to pet ashes. We only have to be careful if it's a cremation. Glass melts and tears up the crematory floor. Story 81. My grandma wasn't buried in a casket, she was cremated, but then buried next to her husband who died almost 30 years earlier. She was a very practical and thrifty woman and always said, "Just cremate me and put me in the ground. Don't waste your money on something stupid." So after her death, we knew she needed to be put in something after cremation. So we go online to find a nice wooden box, nothing fancy but still nice. Eventually my uncle finds something and yells so everyone can hear it, "I think I found the right box. It's on sale. Mom would be so proud." We all start laughing hysterically and agree that that's the one she would have chosen. So my grandma was buried in a small wooden box we found online that was on sale for a little over $20. And I don't think she'd have it any other way. Story 82. I have an anecdote from an elderly coworker. He was talking to me about how money isn't good if you don't spend it because you can't take it with you, as they say. He then began talking about how someone he once knew, who he called a greedy loser, he had managed to save approximately $1 million by being unbelievably cheap and crooked his whole life. This man told his wife he wanted to be buried with all his money when he died. He eventually did die. The wife of this man wrote out a check for his whole bank account and placed it in her late husband's casket. At the viewing, she told my coworker this story about the check and told him, "I hope he finds somewhere to cash it." Wow. I mean, I know you can't take it into the afterlife, but you think at the very least, like, hey, I can't take it with me, to another realm of existence, but I will take it with me to the grave. Not really, man. And how are we feeling about the wife doing that? I mean, as the wife, it's their joint marriage, it's her money too, but, do you feel like it's okay for her to not honor that at all? Or is the check kind of like a cute nudge? Story 83. We buried my dad in his ribbon shirt his mom made for him. He used to play guitar in it. Also his pot leaf hat with a nugget tucked in there, along with a Father's Day card signed by me and my sister he kept since we were kids, and a V-Day card from my mom. They had been divorced almost 30 years at that point, but he still cared for her. And that card was probably the first time I saw how much my mom loved my dad before he broke her heart. Now, his obituary was way more out there. His picture was him with his pot hat, and the funeral home ad is posted right next to some old stuffed white guy. If my sister sees this, hi! Also, don't click my story. Story 84. My granddad was buried with a packet of cigarettes and a fiver for a pint and some crisps in the afterlife. The saddest part of remembering him is the envy of the fact that he lived in a time that a fiver would be enough for a pint and a packet of crisps. My stepdad also told me that as he was the sole family member involved in arranging both his parents' funerals and was struggling with a depressive episode, he said, "F it," and had them both buried in their PJs. Story 85. I don't work in a funeral home, but I work in an end-of-life facility. So I've prepared quite a few bodies for family viewing and funeral home pickup. Weirdest one was a tall, lanky gay man whose partner wanted us to dress him in normal viewing clothes, but with a lacy bra and panties set underneath the clothing. This patient had frontotemporal dementia, so he had a lot of behavioral disturbances that commonly manifested as violent, unpredictable outbursts. Most of the staff were terrified of him, and we only entered his room in pairs for our safety. I knew he could beat me to death if he wanted to, and there wasn't a dang thing I could do to stop him. So, knowing all that, you can imagine how odd it was to fulfill that request. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it was such a stark contrast to our perception of him that I'll never forget it. The nicest one, however, was a lovely man who passed after a long and painful decline. His wife of 40 years picked out his clothing for me to dress him. Huge pair of sweatpants, short-sleeved shirt, and a sweater. When she handed them to me, she said, "I just want him to be comfortable. He always loved these." And y'all, I dang near cried in front of her. Story 86. Slightly off topic, I had a man that watched over me. He took good care of me, taught me what and how to stand up for myself. I loved him very much. He was very much a father to me. I used to get a chiclet gum and he would steal all the dark green ones. They were his favorite. He of course gave me the quarter for them, so I allowed it. He passed, and for about a week I took all the dark green ones and collected them. I placed them in his casket because I wanted him to have his favorites. I also wanted him to know that it was okay he took them. His wife threw a fit, said it was inappropriate, said I shouldn't have been allowed around him. DJ, I hope you enjoy them. I think of you often. You were a wonderful man who loved me like your own. Okay, that took a interesting turn. Story 87. My friend's grandpa passed away recently, and I must say that he was a nice person to everyone. But oh boy, was he a clown. Few days before the funeral, the family advocate read the death note, and under one of the last death wishes, he wrote that he wants to be buried in his underwear and his wife's bra. Everyone, including me, sitting there was shocked, but they made the old man's dream come true. So my friend's pop is now laying down in the earth in his wife's underwear. He was a mad lad before it became mainstream. I wish I had a relative like that. Don't we all, OP? Don't we all? Or I don't know, maybe I don't. But you know what, man? If you don't have one in your life, maybe when you die, you can be that for your family's friend.